Hello Evrine, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe. My channel. That air left my lungs so fast it burned. 1 second I was standing beneath the amber pendant lights in the conservatory room at Ashford House, my fingers still warm around the stem of a champagne flute, and the next my sister-in-law was slamming a stack of glossy photographs onto the polished mahogany cake table like she was delivering evidence in court. The room smelled like buttercream, peonies, and expensive perfume. Crystal votives threw soft gold across the white linen. Somewhere behind me, a fork hit a plate and rang out too brightly. Vanessa Hale stepped closer, one manicured hand planted on her hip, the other tapping the top photograph with a red lacquered nail. Her heels struck the parquet floor like a metronome. Daniel, my husband, went very still beside the 10th anniversary cake, his jaw tightening, his hand flattening over the back of a gilt chair. Judith Marlowe sucked in a breath and pressed her pearls to her throat. Robert Marlowe looked at the photos, then at me, then away. Half our guests pivoted toward us in a slow, hungry ripple, the kind of movement people make when they sense blood in the water. "Tell them," Vanessa said, her voice carrying cleanly over the string quartet still scraping through the last bars of something elegant and inappropriate. "Tell everyone who Adrienne Cross is, Claire." She picked up one of the photographs between 2 fingers and held it high. It showed me in the lobby of the Halcyon Hotel 3 weeks earlier, wearing a charcoal coat, leaning toward a tall man in a navy suit. Another photo showed the same man touching my elbow near the elevators. A third showed us at a table inside the Lantern Room bar, his laptop open between us. A murmur moved across the room. "My name is Claire Bennett Marlowe. I'm 36. And this is the story of how I turned the night my husband's family tried to destroy me into the beginning of everything they lost." Vanessa smiled without warmth. It was as thin as a paper cut. "I knew it," she said. "I told Daniel there was no way you were working late this often for nothing." Daniel finally looked at me. Not confused, not wounded, focused, calculating. That was the moment the last soft illusion inside me went silent. "Claire," he said. And even then his voice was pitched for the room, low and steady, the voice of a man performing heartbreak. "If you have something to say, now would be a good time." I set my champagne flute down on the silver tray of a passing server. I remember that detail because my hand was perfectly steady. The tray reflected the candlelight in broken little crescents. I folded my hands in front of me and looked first at Vanessa, then Daniel, then the guests arrayed around us in tuxedos and silk and polite horror. "What exactly?" I asked evenly. "Would you like me to explain first?" Vanessa laughed, sharp and delighted. "The hotel meetings, the fake calendar entries, the fact that you've been sneaking around for months while Daniel has been planning this party. Pick one." Judith stepped forward then, shoulders square, lips pressed into the line she used whenever she was about to mistake cruelty for dignity. She placed 2 fingers on Daniel's sleeve, as if anchoring him for the audience. "Claire," she said, voice trembling with practiced disappointment, "after everything this family has done for you." There it was. Not what you did, who you owed. A few guests lowered their phones. A few raised them. I recognized Daniel's college friend Marcus Doyle near the back bar, pretending not to stare. I saw Vanessa's husband Caleb with one hand around his whiskey, not meeting my eyes. I saw our event planner, Serena Bell, frozen beside the flower wall, both hands clamped around her clipboard. No one moved toward me. No one asked if the photos were real. They were already rearranging the story in their heads. Anniversary party. Beautiful wife. Humiliating secret. Public betrayal. People love narrative when it costs them nothing. Daniel took a step closer. He smelled like cedar and the smoke from the candles on the cake. "How long?" he asked. A lesser man would have gone louder. Daniel always went quieter when he wanted control. "Long enough," Vanessa cut in before I could answer. "To make a fool out of all of us." I turned my head and looked at her. Really looked. Her right thumb was rubbing the edge of her phone case. Fast. Over and over. Her pupils were wide. She was excited but not calm. She'd been waiting for this. "All of us." I said. "Don't be clever," she snapped. "You used our family, our name, our home. You stand here under our roof celebrating 10 years of marriage while you're sleeping with some consultant in hotel bars." "Vanessa," I said calmly, "this isn't your marriage." "No," she said. "It's my brother's life." That landed exactly as she'd intended. I saw 3 women near the windows exchange looks. I heard someone's breath catch. Daniel kept his face arranged in that grave, injured stillness, but the muscle in his cheek flickered. He wanted rage from me, denial, tears, anything he could point to and call guilt. Instead, I reached for the top photograph and held it at the corner so the light hit the image cleanly. Halcyon Hotel, March 18th, 7:42 p.m. In the picture, Adrian Cross's hand was near my elbow, not on it. Behind us, reflected in the brass panel beside the elevator, was the blurred outline of a woman lifting a phone. Vanessa. I almost smiled. Robert cleared his throat. Maybe we should move this into a private room. We are in a private room, Vanessa said. And I think the people who showed up to celebrate their marriage deserve to know who Claire really is. I turned to Daniel. Do they also deserve to know why you printed surveillance photographs for an anniversary toast? Something flickered in his eyes then. Small. Quick. But there. Vanessa barked a laugh. Surveillance. Listen to her. I let the silence sit. The silence that followed was absolute. Then I reached into my clutch, unlocked my phone, and scrolled with my thumb at an unhurried pace that made Vanessa's breathing change. Before we continue, I said, I want everyone to notice something. These photographs were taken on March 18th, March 26th, and April 2nd. All 3 were taken by someone standing within 15 feet of me. All 3 were taken after someone gained access to my private calendar. And all 3 conveniently exclude the person seated across from Adrian Cross at every meeting. Daniel's voice sharpened. What are you doing? I lifted my eyes to his. Correcting the record. He took another step. Vanessa touched his arm as if to stop him, then thought better of it and let her hand fall. Judith looked between us, no longer entirely certain which part of the script we were in. I tapped my phone once and held it outward. This is the full image from March 18th. On the screen, the cropped hotel lobby photograph expanded. The frame widened. There I was beside Adrian. And there, seated 10 feet behind us in the lantern room, visible in the reflection of the mirrored wine cabinet, was Nora Whitfield of Whitfield & Keene, one of the most expensive litigation attorneys in Manhattan, looking directly at her laptop. Marcus Doyle whispered, Jesus. Vanessa's expression didn't collapse all at once. It folded in on itself like wet paper. That doesn't prove anything. No, I said. It proves your evidence is incomplete. I scrolled again. This is Adrian Cross's engagement letter, dated February 3rd, retained by my counsel as a forensic investigator. The document filled my screen. Nora's firm letterhead. Adrian's signature. Mine. Daniel's face lost color so fast it looked painful. Vanessa stepped toward me. You forged that. I looked at her for a beat. Do you want to say that while Nora Whitfield is standing 6 feet behind the floral arch, every head in the room turned? Nora had arrived without my noticing, because unlike Vanessa, she understood entrances. She stood beside the ice sculpture in a dove-gray suit, coat still buttoned, a leather folio tucked under one arm, expression neutral enough to be frightening. Adrian Cross was beside her, taller than I remembered, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone. He gave Daniel a small nod, as though they were meeting at a conference, not at the edge of an ambush gone wrong. I heard the room exhale. Daniel stared at Adrian. You said you were a restructuring consultant. Adrian's voice was mild. No. Vanessa said that. I let her. That was the first crack. The second came when I opened an email chain and turned the screen toward Robert. This is a purchase authorization for the Halcyon Hotel suite on March 26th. Room 1814. It wasn't booked for an affair. It was booked on the Marlowe Family Foundation corporate card, ending in 4417. Daniel approved the expense under donor cultivation. Robert took my phone. His heavy brows drew together. What? Vanessa turned to Daniel too quickly. You told me. Daniel snapped. Be quiet. The words hit harder because they weren't meant for public consumption. Caleb straightened near the bar. Judith's hand slipped from Daniel's sleeve. I continued before anyone could recover. And this, I said, scrolling again, is building footage from our house in Rye from March 11th at 6:14 a.m. Vanessa, you came into the kitchen while I was upstairs. You opened my handbag. You removed my planner. You photographed 4 pages. Then you put it back. Vanessa actually laughed, but it came out high and wrong. This is insane. It is, I agreed. Especially because you forgot the camera above the pantry. I didn't need to show the footage to the whole room. Just the first still. Vanessa in her camel coat, bent over the marble island, my green leather planner in both hands. Her face, clear as daylight. Silence spread across the room like spilled oil. Judith took one step back. Daniel's composure was fraying now. Claire, enough. I met his gaze. Actually, Daniel, what you and Vanessa just attempted was defamation in front of 63 witnesses. That was the sentence that changed the room. You could feel it. The axis tilted. Guests who had been leaning away from me leaned away from them instead. Caleb set his drink down too hard on the bar, and the ice clicked against crystal. Serena Bell put her clipboard against her chest like a shield. Marcus Doyle slowly lowered his phone. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. You can't threaten us at our own party. Our party, I said quietly. And I'm not threatening you. Adrian stepped forward then, and handed Nora a small tablet. Nora glanced at it once, then at Daniel. Mr. Marlowe, she said in the tone professionals use when they are already 3 steps ahead. If your sister wants to continue accusing my client of adultery, I can also display the full metadata showing these images were airdropped from her phone to yours at 8:07 p.m. tonight from the ladies' lounge. Vanessa went white. And, Nora continued, I can explain why the same device appeared in the parking garage of the Halcyon on all 3 dates after Ms. Marlowe began asking questions about foundation disbursements. There it was, the thing beneath the thing. Robert looked from Nora to Daniel to me. What questions? I turned slightly so I could address the room without raising my voice. 3 months ago, I found duplicate vendor invoices tied to the Marlowe Family Foundation's Restoration Grant Program. Amounts just under approval thresholds. Repeated transfers to a firm called North Spire Consulting. When I asked Daniel about them, he told me I was overworked. When I asked the controller, the files had already been altered. 2 weeks later, Vanessa started following me into rooms I hadn't told anyone I was entering. Judith whispered, Daniel. He didn't look at her. I knew someone was building a story about me, I said. So I gave them one. I made sure there were meetings to photograph. I made sure there was a hotel room to discover. I made sure anyone rifling through my calendar would find exactly what I wanted them to find. Vanessa backed into the edge of the cake table. Her hand hit the silver cake knife, and it rattled against the porcelain plate. This is crazy, she said again, softer now. You're twisting this. I tilted my head. Am I? Nora closed her folio. I don't think this venue is appropriate for the rest of the discussion. Daniel found his voice all at once. There will be no discussion. Claire, if this is some elaborate attempt to distract from what you've done. I interrupted him with a look, not a word. Then I picked up my champagne again, took one slow sip, and set the glass down. The next conversation, I said, will happen at Whitfield and Keene at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bring separate counsel. You'll need it. Vanessa's breathing sounded shallow and fast. Daniel's eyes were fixed on me now. No performance left in them, just anger and a dawning recognition that he had stepped onto a stage I built for him. I picked up the top photograph from the table, folded it neatly in half, and placed it in Daniel's inside jacket pocket. Happy anniversary, I said. Then I walked out past the flower wall, past the mirrored corridor, past the hotel staff pretending not to stare. Nora and Adrian followed me into the cool, polished quiet of the lobby. Behind us, the conservatory room finally erupted. They thought they had caught me cheating, but they had no idea I had spent 11 weeks documenting the people trying to erase me. The next morning, Manhattan looked rinsed clean. Rain had passed some time before dawn, and the windows of Whitfield and Keene's 42nd floor conference room held the city in pale silver light. The table was black walnut, wide enough to feel ceremonial. The leather chairs still carried the faint scent of polish. A row of water glasses stood in front of each place setting, untouched and precise. I arrived first with Nora and Adrian. I wore cream silk under a slate suit, my hair pinned low. No necklace, no unnecessary softness. Nora arranged 3 binders at measured intervals down the table. Each had a white label stamped in black. Timeline, disbursements, communications. Adrian connected his laptop to the wall screen and tested the remote once, then set it beside his legal pad. At 9:03, Robert entered with Judith. Robert's shoulders looked heavier than they had the night before. Judith had dressed for control in navy wool and diamonds, but her lipstick was slightly outside the line on her upper lip. She sat without speaking and placed both hands flat on the table as if the wood itself might steady her. At 9:06, Vanessa came in with Caleb and a lawyer I recognized from donor events, Martin Sloan, a man with a varnished voice and the expression of someone who had been told half a story in a moving car. Vanessa wore ivory, which would have been bold if it didn't read desperate. She took her seat 2 chairs down from me and crossed her legs too tightly. Caleb looked like he'd slept in his suit. Daniel arrived last at 9:11 with his own counsel, Brent Mercer. He didn't look at me when he sat down. That, more than anything else, told me he knew how bad it was. Nora waited until the clock turned to 9:12, then closed the glass door with one quiet click. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We can do this efficiently, or we can do it publicly. That choice remains yours for the next hour." Martin Sloan leaned back. "My client denies all allegations of surveillance, defamation, or fraud." Nora nodded once. "Good. Denials are easier to organize." She opened the first binder and turned it toward the center of the table. The pages were tabbed in colors. Dates, amounts, names. The kind of order that makes liars feel the floor shift under them. "January 8th, Nora began. Ms. Marlowe identifies 3 duplicate invoices submitted to the Marlowe Family Foundation under the Historic Preservation Program. North Spire Consulting. Invoice numbers NSC 441, NSC 444, and NSC 446. Total amount, $287,000. January 10th, she requests backup documentation from the family office. January 11th, access logs show Mr. Daniel Marlowe entering her document portal from an unrecognized IP address associated with the guest house on the Marlowe estate. Brent Mercer cut in. "Circumstantial." Adrian slid a printout across the table. "Not particularly. We have the device ID." Daniel's eyes moved to the page and then away. Nora continued. January 19th. A new limited liability company is filed in Delaware under the name North Spire Consulting Group LLC. Registered agent, a corporate service provider in Wilmington. Beneficial owner hidden. February 2nd. That same LLC receives a transfer of $420,000 from a vendor clearing account linked to Marlowe Foundation operations. February 3rd, my client retains Mr. Cross after concluding she is being monitored. Vanessa said, "Too quickly." "Monitored by who?" Adrian looked up. "You." Her knuckles whitened around her water glass. Nora clicked the remote. The screen behind her lit with a timeline. Dates ran down the left side in black, branching into document thumbnails, screen captures, and bank trails. It looked clinical. It looked irreversible. February 14th, Nora said. Ms. Hale texts her husband Caleb Hale, quote, "If she keeps digging, Daniel says we need something personal to shut her up." Martin Sloan straightened. "Where did you obtain that?" "From Ms. Hale's former executive assistant," Nora said, and the door opened behind her. Evelyn Park entered carrying a slim laptop in a file box. Vanessa's head snapped around. Evelyn! For 11 years, Evelyn had been the invisible gravity of the Marlowe offices. Controller, keeper of numbers. The woman who knew which donor preferred fountain pens, which contractor padded labor, which board member missed deadlines and blamed assistants for it. Judith trusted her because Evelyn never made noise. Daniel trusted her because she made his world run on time. Vanessa trusted her because powerful women often mistake competence for loyalty. Evelyn set the file box on the credenza and took the empty chair beside Adrian. "I resigned this morning," she said. Her voice was quiet and exact, every syllable aligned. "Before that, I copied records after Daniel asked me to backdate grant approvals and reclassify personal expenditures as cultivation expenses. When I refused, he suggested my CPA license could become complicated." Vanessa gave a brittle laugh. "You bitter little traitor." Evelyn didn't even look at her. "No, just not interested in prison." That was the unexpected fracture. You could see it on their faces. Not outrage, recalculation. They had all believed the machinery around them was theirs forever. Secretaries, assistants, controllers, drivers, the people who held doors and passwords and calendar keys. They never imagined those people are watching the full shape of the room. Nora gestured to the second binder. March 4th, Ms. Park notes a series of transfers routed through North Spire and into Hale Strategies Holdings, an entity owned by Caleb Hale. Caleb sat upright. That's a legitimate consulting firm. Please subscribe me channel and press the bell icon. Adrian pushed another page across to him. With no employees, no office lease, and a mailbox at a UPS store on Lexington. Robert closed his eyes for a brief second. Nora clicked again. March 11th, security footage shows Ms. Hale entering Ms. Marlowe's kitchen and photographing her planner. March 18th, 26th, and April 2nd, Ms. Hale follows Ms. Marlowe to meetings with Mr. Cross and photographs her from concealed positions. April 6th, Mr. Marlowe approves payment to Serena Bell Events for an audiovisual package labeled Anniversary Montage. That package includes projection equipment reserved for enlarged image display. Serena was not in the room, but I pictured her face from the night before, bloodless under event makeup. Martin Sloan frowned. That proves poor judgment, not fraud. Nora slid a final tab packet toward him. Then let's simplify. This is a draft post-nuptial agreement created on Daniel Marlowe's laptop at 12:18 a.m. on April 1st. In it, he cites anticipated marital misconduct by his wife as grounds for accelerated separation and liquidation restrictions. On April 4th, he emails Brent Mercer requesting, quote, aggressive options if infidelity becomes publicly undeniable. Brent's head turned so sharply toward Daniel, I heard the collar of his shirt scrape his jaw. I never saw that phrasing, Brent said. Daniel spoke for the first time in several minutes. Because it was a draft. I looked at him then. Really looked. The expensive watch. The perfect cuff links. The crease that had formed between his brows over the last 3 months, and deepened whenever I asked a simple question. This was who he had become when cornered. Not loud. Strategic. Willing to soil whatever he touched if it bought him time. Nora folded her hands. Let's add the part you were most certain would never surface. April 7th. Mr. Marlowe meets with Ms. Hale and Mr. Hale in the private dining room of Bellwether Club. The plan discussed is straightforward. Publicly accuse Claire Marlowe of adultery at a high-witness event, pressure her into signing the post-nuptial agreement, then discredit any later allegations she raises regarding the foundation as retaliatory. During that conversation, Mr. Hale asks whether the room key from the halcyon is enough. Mr. Marlowe responds, quote, once my mother sees the pictures, she won't ask questions. Judith made a sound then. Not a word. More like something inside her had finally understood the cost of loyalty. Martin Sloan recovered first. You have no recording of Bellwether Club. Adrian reached into his briefcase and placed a slim black device on the table. I do, he said. Vanessa stared at it as if it were venomous. You planted something. No, Adrian said. You invited me. You thought I was a crisis consultant you could use after the accusation. You asked me how to make a betrayal story stick. I recorded the meeting you scheduled because my client instructed me to attend everything you offered. I leaned back slightly and watched comprehension sweep across Daniel's face. He remembered the call. Vanessa had insisted Adrian was useful. A discreet outsider. Someone who understood optics. Daniel had nodded because he always believed he could manage the people in front of him. I spoke for the first time in several minutes. Next time, make sure they're not working for both sides. No one answered. The silence had weight now. Not shock. Consequence. Robert finally looked at Daniel. Tell me this isn't true. Daniel's voice came out low and strained. Dad, it's not what it sounds like. Caleb let out one ugly, humorless laugh. No, it's exactly what it sounds like. Vanessa rounded on him. You don't get to talk. Half those transfers went to cover your debt. Caleb's head jerked toward her. My debt. Daniel's the one who moved donor money. Daniel snapped. Because you were drowning and Vanessa said it would be temporary. There it is, Nora said quietly, making a note. Judith turned to Vanessa in horror. You dragged Daniel into this. Vanessa actually leaned forward, eyes bright with fury. I dragged him. He was already in it. He needed cash after that stupid biotech investment blew up, and he couldn't tell you because Golden Boy doesn't fail. Robert's hand slammed the table once. The sound cracked through the room. Enough. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Once people begin protecting themselves, truth pours out in ugly shapes. Brent Mercer was already gathering papers. Daniel, I need a private conversation with my client. So do I, Martin Sloan said, looking at Vanessa and Caleb with visible disgust. Judith whispered, Daniel, tell me you weren't going to divorce Claire over a lie. He didn't answer fast enough. That was answer enough. I let them fracture. I wanted them to see one another clearly at least once. I wanted the private machinery exposed to daylight. Nora had told me weeks earlier that evidence wins cases, but revelation changes people. I understood what she meant only then, watching Judith realize that all her certainty about family had simply been vanity with better manners. Nora waited until the room had exhausted its first wave of denial. Then she placed a single document in the center of the table. It was thinner than the binders, cleaner, ruthless in its simplicity. This is the proposed resolution, she said. 1. Immediate resignation of Daniel Marlowe from all fiduciary roles involving the Marlowe Family Foundation and Marlowe Developments. 2. Repayment arrangements secured by sale of specified personal assets and clawback of diverted funds from North Spire Consulting and Hale Strategies Holdings. 3. Written retraction of all allegations against Claire Marlowe, delivered to every guest present at last night's event and to the board. 4. Preservation of all digital devices for forensic review. 5. Cooperation with any inquiry initiated by the New York Attorney General and the District Attorney's Office. If you sign today, we deliver this first as a civil resolution with supporting evidence, sealed pending compliance. If you refuse, we file by noon and begin a parallel criminal referral. Martin Sloan lifted the first page. This is extortion. Nora's expression didn't change. No. Extortion depends on a false threat. I am promising accurate consequences. Brent exhaled slowly through his nose. If Daniel cooperates, can criminal exposure be mitigated? There are no guarantees, Nora said. Only facts. Cooperation tends to age better than arrogance. I watched Daniel then. He had always been beautiful in the way polished things are beautiful. Dark suit, straight posture, the easy confidence that comes from never being meaningfully denied. But that morning his confidence had shrunk like fabric in hot water. He looked at the resolution, at the binders, at the screen, at his mother, at me. He understood that the affair accusation had failed, that the lie was now documented, that every move after this would be defensive. He also understood, finally, that I had known him better than he had known me. He spoke to me directly for the first time since the party. How long, he asked hoarsely, have you been planning this? I folded my hands on the table. Long enough. Vanessa gave a short, disbelieving shake of her head. You sat in our house. You ate at our table. And you went through my bag, I said. Her mouth closed. You should have just taken the settlement, Caleb muttered to Daniel. Daniel turned on him. There was no settlement because your wife couldn't stop performing. Vanessa actually laughed at that, raw and bright. My performance. You were going to stand there in front of 60 people and ask your wife if she'd slept with someone else. Robert looked as though he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Evelyn opened her laptop. I also had the draft guest seating chart Vanessa amended to ensure board members had direct sight lines to the cake table. If that helps anyone remember this was planned. It helped. Brent asked for a recess. Martin demanded one. Nora granted 15 minutes and no more. The lawyers moved into separate corners, voices clipped and low. Daniel stood by the window with Brent, hands braced on the sill, city light flattening him into a silhouette. Vanessa paced near the credenza, phone in hand, then realized too late that no one was answering her texts. Caleb sat down heavily and stared at the table. Judith cried without making any noise. Robert stared at the timeline on the screen, as if he were trying to locate the exact date his family had stopped being what he believed it was. I remained where I was. Adrian leaned toward me slightly. You all right? Yes. You don't have to stay in the room. I know. I stayed anyway. When the lawyers reconvened, their clients looked smaller. Not physically, structurally, as if some internal architecture had failed. Brent spoke first. Daniel will sign pending minor language revisions and reserves all rights related to marital dissolution. I almost smiled at the phrasing. Even now. Rights. Martin Sloan spoke next, visibly irritated. Ms. Hale and Mr. Hale will sign the preservation and repayment terms, but we need separate schedules attached for disbursement responsibility. Nora nodded. Reasonable. Judith looked up, eyes glassy. Claire. Her voice caught on my name. For years I would have moved toward that sound automatically. Smoothed it, softened it, repaired whatever bruise the family needed hidden. Instead I waited. I didn't know, she whispered. I believe part of that, not the whole. Judith never wanted facts. She wanted atmosphere. Approval. The illusion of a flawless family curated under warm lighting and expensive florals. She didn't need to know every detail to be complicit in the conditions that allowed them. I know, I said. It wasn't forgiveness. It was accuracy. The signing itself was quieter than I'd imagined. Pens clicked. Paper shifted. Nora initialed revisions in blue. Brent adjusted a paragraph on asset recovery. Martin argued over wording on intent and lost. Daniel signed first, jaw tight. Vanessa signed with visible anger, carving her name into the paper hard enough to indent the page beneath it. Caleb signed and let the pen drop. Robert signed as board chair on the emergency governance provisions. Judith signed the witness page with a hand that shook. When it was done, Nora gathered the originals into a leather folder and closed it. We'll be in touch by end of day with the retraction language, she said. No one stood immediately. Then Daniel looked at me and said, very softly, was any of it real? He meant the marriage, maybe the anniversary, maybe the last 10 years. Men like Daniel always ask questions that center their own injury, even at the end. I held his gaze. Enough of it was that hurt him more than anger would have. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and slid my chair back under the table. As I reached the door, Vanessa said my name in a voice I barely recognized. Not sharp, not triumphant, ragged. I turned. She stared at me with the exhausted hatred of someone who has mistaken winning for safety her entire life. You plan to humiliate us. No, I said quietly. You plan the humiliation. I planned the record. Then I looked at Robert, at Judith, at Daniel. You always said the family name was everything, I said. You should have protected it better. I left the conference room without hurry. Behind me, I heard Brent asking for device surrender protocols, Martin demanding copies, Caleb swearing under his breath, Judith beginning to cry again. The hallway outside smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. I pressed the elevator button and watched the numbers descend, feeling not triumph exactly, but clean air. The next few weeks were paperwork, statements, negotiations, and the peculiar administrative grind that follows any elegant disaster. Public collapses look dramatic from the outside. From within, there's spreadsheets, call logs, preserved devices, revised trust language, and attorneys telling grown adults not to delete text messages. 6 months later, I stood barefoot in my kitchen in Tribeca while October sunlight spilled across the pale stone counter like warm silk. My apartment wasn't large by Marlowe standards, but every inch of it belonged to me. The cabinets were oak, matte and quiet. The espresso machine hissed. Softly beside a bowl of late figs, a line of herbs sat in the window over the sink, the basil catching light, the rosemary leaning toward the glass. I wore one of Daniel's old cashmere sweaters for a while after I moved in. Then donated it the day I realized I no longer needed to borrow softness from something that had once hurt me. I made coffee. Real coffee. Not the machine-perfect cups dispensed by staff in a house that never belonged to me, no matter how many years I walked its hallways. I opened the balcony door and let in the city. Car horns. Distant sirens. Someone laughing 3 floors down. Life. Unapologetic and ordinary. People always want to know what happened after. They imagine a single decisive ending. There isn't one. There are a dozen smaller endings, each arriving on its own schedule. Daniel lost his board seat before noon the day our lawyers circulated the retraction. The board minutes used phrases like interim governance failure and breach of fiduciary duty. The newspapers were kinder than the facts. He resigned from Marlowe Developments to focus on personal matters, which is how powerful men are often escorted out of the room before the room admits what happened. The Attorney General's office opened an inquiry after Nora's packet landed on the right desk. Because Daniel cooperated early and repaid aggressively, the criminal side narrowed. Civil penalties did not. Neither did the professional consequences. Donors talked to one another. Banks do too. By summer, he was consulting quietly for a mid-sized logistics firm in Stamford, nowhere near the skyline he used to believe he owned. The biotech lost Vanessa, shouted about turned out to be worse than she'd known, and several of the temporary transfers they had all counted on staying invisible became permanent stains. Later I heard his relationship with Celeste Rowan, the PR executive he'd been billing to donor outreach dinners for months, lasted exactly 7 weeks. Once it existed outside hotel receipts and secrecy. Apparently admiration decays quickly under fluorescent sublets and legal bills. Vanessa's fall was louder because she had built more of herself in public. She lost the chairmanship of the Hollis Children's Hospital Gala after 2 committee members forwarded the retraction to the board before she'd even written her own statement. 3 women who had once kissed her cheek at luncheons stopped returning her calls. The flower sponsor for her annual spring fundraiser withdrew. The boutique fitness studio where she taught community leadership workshops ended the arrangement after screenshots of her messages to Caleb began circulating in quieter corners of louder circles. Her marriage held for another 4 months, then didn't. Caleb filed first. By then the tax questions around Hale strategies had become too expensive to romanticize. The last time I saw Vanessa in person, she was outside St. Ambrius in a cream coat that cost more than my first apartment, speaking into her phone with the frantic, brittle brightness of someone performing prosperity for an audience that has already wandered away. Judith never faced legal consequences, but social ones suited her better because they struck where she actually lived. Invitations thinned. The old certainty with which she entered rooms disappeared. She stayed on the museum host committee through spring, then quietly rotated off. A woman who had once corrected a server over the angle of a spoon placement now spent an entire luncheon pretending not to notice when 2 people beside her lowered their voices after saying the Marlowe name. Shame travels through that world like a cautionary note. She sent me 3 emails over the summer. The first was formal and wounded. The second asked if we could have tea woman to woman. The third arrived at 1:14 in the morning and simply said, "I miss you." The family isn't the same. I archived all 3. Robert was in some ways the only one who looked directly at the wreckage. He repaid foundation deficits from personal accounts to stabilize the programs Daniel and Caleb had compromised. He brought in outside auditors. He dissolved the family office structure that had protected sloppiness and ego in equal measure. He retired the following March. We spoke twice after the settlement, both times in Nora's office, both times about governance and not about grief. That was his limit. Still, when a man spends decades confusing command with stewardship, even factual regret is a kind of progress. Serena Bell, our event planner, was never charged with anything more serious than cowardice. She had known the projection package was not for a montage. She had told herself it wasn't her marriage, not her business, not her job to intervene. She lost 2 corporate accounts after the story made its way through enough assistance. In New York, reputations often travel through people powerful clients forget to thank. The texts came for a while, as they always do when people discover consequences cannot be charmed backward. Daniel's were the most persistent at first. Calm, reasonable, strategic, even in ruin. We can resolve this privately. You know Vanessa escalated everything. I never meant for it to happen that way. Can we talk without counsel just once? Then, later, after the court finalized the divorce and the apartment sold and the foundation inquiry turned ugly. I miss who we were. No response became its own language. Vanessa sent voice notes instead of texts, which felt on brand. One was furious enough to distort the microphone. One sounded drunk. One opened with, "You think you won," and dissolved into crying before the 3rd sentence. Caleb sent exactly one message. "You were right about Daniel." I deleted it unread after the preview. Judith sent holiday greetings so tenderly phrased they almost counted as revisionist fiction. Robert sent a link to the final audit report with a single line beneath it, for the record. That one I kept. What surprised me wasn't that they kept reaching. It was how little I wanted to reach back. In the middle of all that administrative wreckage, something else happened. People began calling me. Not social calls. Referrals. Quiet introductions from Nora, then from Evelyn, then from women who had heard some version of my story and recognized the shape of it in their own lives. Not the anniversary ambush specifically, the deeper pattern, the subtle asset movements, the reputational setup, the gentle, smiling insistence that you are overreacting while someone is building a case against your sanity, your credibility, your future. At first I helped informally. I reviewed email trails. I explained how calendar access could be weaponized, how concerned family narratives get deployed, how to preserve devices before a spouse remembers to wipe them. Then Nora said one rainy Thursday over lunch at Odeon, "You know this is a business, right?" 3 months later, I signed the lease on a narrow office with steel-framed windows on Hudson Street and started Bennett Ledger Advisory. We help people, mostly women, identify hidden financial manipulation inside relationships and family businesses before those manipulations become crises. Some clients come in because they suspect money is missing. Some come in because someone has started watching them a little too carefully. Some come in because their partner suddenly wants them to sign something under soft lighting and urgent language. We map patterns. We preserve records. We make timelines. We translate dread into facts. Evelyn became my first partner on paper and my second in spirit. She handles financial forensics with the same unshowy brilliance that once kept the Marlowe machine moving. We built the firm on the skills we sharpened in the dark: pattern recognition, patience, clean documentation, emotional composure under pressure. Some mornings we laugh at the absurdity of it. Other mornings we sit with clients whose hands shake over coffee cups while they describe being called paranoid in kitchens with marble islands and curated art. We never tell them to calm down. We tell them to forward the email, screenshot the message, save the login alert, breathe, and let us build the record. I wasn't alone after the collapse. That mattered more than I expected. Nora remained Nora, which is to say formidable, dry, and incapable of wasting sympathy where respect will do. Adrian surfaced occasionally when a case required discreet investigative work, always with the same quiet competence that had made him such a useful phantom in mine. And then there was Evelyn, who became the kind of friend adulthood rarely gives you unless fire first burns away the decorative people. One Friday evening in late November, the two of us were eating pistachio gelato from paper cups at our desks because we'd both worked through lunch, and she looked up from a spreadsheet and said, "You won't believe who I just saw." I raised an eyebrow. That's usually a bad sign. "Vanessa," she said, "at Cipriani downtown, doing the place cards for a charity dinner herself because the committee couldn't afford the calligrapher after 3 sponsors backed out." I laughed before I could stop myself. Not cruelly, just an honest surprise at the specificity of karma. Evelyn took another bite of gelato. She still had her chin up. Of course she did. She asked if I was happy. And I told her I'm employed, rested, and not awaiting a subpoena. So yes, that laugh stayed with me the rest of the night. There were other updates too. Marcus Doyle, who had witnessed the party from the back bar and later apologized for saying nothing in the moment, became an unlikely source of gossip because finance men talk more than they realize after a second drink. He called once to tell me Daniel had tried to join a private investment syndicate and been politely declined. Another time Nora mentioned, almost casually, that one of the bored wives who used to orbit Judith now referred to the entire episode as that anniversary prosecution, which was inaccurate but not unsatisfying. My mornings changed first, then my evenings. That is how healing actually announces itself, not with one grand speech, with the gradual return of appetite, then humor, then stillness, with the realization that your body no longer braces when the elevator doors open, with the pleasure of buying flowers because you like them, not because 50 guests are coming over, with the fact that your phone lighting up after midnight is more likely to mean a client in London than a husband manufacturing concern. The final shape of my new life arrived slowly enough that I trusted it. That evening, 6 months after the anniversary party, the sky over the Hudson turned amber and copper, and the office windows caught the sunset until the whole room looked lit from inside. The skyline beyond the glass glowed like embers under glass. Evelyn had gone home an hour earlier. Nora had texted to cancel dinner because a judge somewhere believed deadlines were decorative. I stayed behind to finish a memo, then gave up when the light got too beautiful to ignore. There was a knock on my open office door. I looked up and saw Chloe Bennett standing there with a bakery box balanced on one palm. Chloe had been Vanessa's junior events assistant for 2 years. At the party, she was the one stationed near the floral arch, the one who watched Vanessa cue the projection equipment and then quietly unplugged one of the secondary screens the second the room went sideways. I hadn't noticed her that night. Later, I learned she was the one who told Evelyn that Vanessa had asked Serena Bell to test image enlargement for maximum humiliation. She'd stayed with Vanessa just long enough to forward calendars, vendor notes, and one crucial message thread before resigning 2 weeks later. Why had she switched? Because Vanessa had promised to blame her if the party went wrong. Because Daniel had spoken about girls like Chloe as if service were the same as invisibility. Because sometimes the person holding the clipboards sees the truth first. You said if I was ever in the neighborhood I should stop by, Chloe said. I did. She walked in, set the box on my desk, and opened it to reveal 2 lemon tarts from Lavaine's little sister pastry counter around the corner. Peace offering, she said. Or celebration. I'm not sure which. What's the occasion? She lifted one shoulder. I got the job. She'd been interviewing for a production role at a documentary studio in Brooklyn. A real one. Better money. Better people. Work that didn't require absorbing other women's delusions as administrative labor. I found 2 forks in the office kitchenette, and we carried the tarts up to the roof deck the building tenants rarely used after 6. The benches were teak, the planters black steel, the air cold enough to sharpen everything. Downtown flickered on below us, one window at a time. Fairy lights moved across the river in steady lines. Somewhere to the south, a helicopter passed in a brief chop of sound and vanished. Chloe leaned against the railing beside me, jacket zipped to her chin. You know, she said. Vanessa used to talk about you like you were a problem to solve. I took a bite of tart. Lemon, bright and clean. That sounds like Vanessa. I believed her for a while. Chloe looked out at the water. Then I watched you at the party. You didn't flinch. Everyone else did. You just looked finished. With them, I said. Not with myself. She smiled. I think that was the part they missed. We stood there for a minute without speaking. The city does good work in silence if you let it. A warm square of light came on in a building across the street. Then another. The river caught the last orange edge of the sky and held it. I thought about the woman I had been a year earlier. Careful. Accommodating. Brilliant in ways I kept packaging as usefulness, so no one would feel threatened by them. I had mistaken endurance for virtue. I had believed that if I was loyal enough, competent enough, loving enough, then manipulation would eventually run out of room around me. I don't blame that version of myself. She was not weak, just uninitiated. She still believed that honesty announced itself in other people the way it did in her. The woman standing on that roof understood something colder and kinder. Some people do not need your trust. They need your access. Some rooms are not homes no matter how many years your coat hangs in the hall. And composure, when earned rather than performed, is a form of authorship. You get to decide the pace of your own truth. Chloe lifted her paper cup of takeout tea. To new jobs. I raised mine. To clean records. We clinked the thin cardboard rims together and laughed. There was no dramatic closure waiting for me after that. No final apology at the door. No cinematic collapse. Just the quieter, better thing. A life reconstructed by my own hands. Work with purpose in it. People around me who didn't require self-erasure as proof of love. Mornings that belonged to me. Evenings that did too. The years behind me felt less like wreckage than raw material. Sometimes, in moments like that one on the roof, with the orange glow fading into blue and the first city lights appearing one by one, I thought about Daniel and Vanessa and Judith and even Robert with something that was not forgiveness exactly, but no longer anger. They had been cruel. They had been arrogant. They had mistaken my stillness for softness and my kindness for blindness. But they had also forced a question I might otherwise have postponed for another decade. What kind of life was I willing to protect? For that question, at least, I was grateful. I never thanked them out loud. Some gratitude is private. Some closure does not need witnesses. What I know now is simple. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying the people who hurt you. It's about building a life their lies can no longer enter. And if I've learned anything from the night my anniversary became their downfall, it's this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about making them pay. It's about standing so fully in the truth that, eventually, they do it to themselves.